The cemetery was empty. It always was this time of morning. Just flat ground and old granite and the kind of silence that had weight to it. Then she saw them, a man, a boy, standing at her husband's grave like they belonged there, like they had always belonged there. She walked faster, cut across the grass. And that was when she saw it, on the man's wrist, catching the pale March light. She knew that watch. She had clasped it onto her husband's wrist herself, 6 years ago, on their 3rd anniversary. She had held it in a plastic hospital bag the night he didn't come home. She had not been able to look at it since. The man turned. He didn't flinch, didn't run. Just looked at her with the steadiness of someone who had been waiting for this moment. And somehow that was worse. The first thing Sloan Hargrove noticed was the watch, not the man wearing it, not the boy crouching at her husband's grave with a fistful of white carnations. The watch, silver-faced, dark leather band, on the wrist of a stranger who had no business being here. She knew that watch. She had clasped it onto Warren's wrist on their 3rd anniversary, had watched him wear it every day for 6 years, had held it in her hands the night the hospital gave her his personal effects in a clear plastic bag, and had not been able to look at it since. It was sitting on the wrist of a man she had never seen before in her life. So yes, the watch was the first thing. The cemetery on the east side of Harwick was not a place most people visited twice. It sat behind a black iron gate on the corner of Prater Avenue and 6th Street, squeezed between a shuttered tire shop and a stretch of city-owned grass that the maintenance crew kept promising to deal with. The headstones on the west side leaned at angles that made them look tired. The ones on the east side still held their shine. Polished granite catching March light like they hadn't quite accepted what they were yet. Sloan came here every few months, not on a schedule, not with flowers. She came when she couldn't avoid it anymore, stayed as long as she could stand, and left before the smell of cold grass had time to settle into her coat. She had not been here since November, 4 months, which felt both too long and not long enough, depending on the day. She parked on the street, walked through the iron gate, turned left at the second path, and stopped. There was someone at Warren's grave, 2 someones, a man mid-30s, standing a few feet back with his hands in his jacket pockets, and a boy, 8 maybe 9, crouching at the base of the headstone, arranging carnations against the granite with the focused care of someone performing a ritual he knew well. The boy was talking not to the man, to the headstone. "I got 100 on my spelling test," he was saying, easy and unhurried, the way you'd talk to a neighbor you'd known your whole life. "Dad said I could pick dinner. I picked burritos. He tried to suggest pizza. I suggested it once," the man said. It felt like a campaign. Sloan stood very still. Then she started walking. She moved off the gravel path onto the grass directly toward them. The man heard her coming and turned, and that was when she saw the watch properly. The silver face, the dark band. 3 initials engraved on the case, WRH. Her jaw tightened before she could stop it. She stopped 6 feet away. Her eyes moved from the headstone to the boy to the man. The boy had gone quiet, pressing slightly closer to his father without being asked, the way children do when they sense something their parents haven't explained yet. "Who are you?" Sloan said. Not a question, a demand with a period at the end of it. The man didn't flinch, didn't step back, just looked at her with the steadiness of someone who had spent time thinking about exactly this moment. "My name is Garrett Merritt," he said. "This is my son, Owen. Why are you at this grave?" "We come every month." Something sharpened in Sloan's chest. Every month, yes. How long? 2 years. 2 years. She had never seen him. Not once. Her eyes dropped back to the watch. "Where did you get that?" "It was given to me. Given to you." The flatness in her voice could have stripped paint. "That watch belonged to my husband." The air between them changed in a way she couldn't entirely account for. The boy, Owen, looked up at his father. The man kept his eyes on Sloan. "You're Sloan Hargrove," he said. "Yes. And I want to know why a man I have never seen before is standing at my husband's grave wearing his watch." She said it quietly. That was almost worse than if she'd raised her voice. The restraint in it was its own kind of force. The man crouched down to his son's level. "Hey, bud, you remember the bench near the gate? The one by the old oak? Yeah, can you go sit there a few minutes?" The boy looked between his father and Sloan. That small chin went forward, assessing. Then he took the phone his father held out, turned and walked back up the path. One look over his shoulder before he rounded the hedge. Sloan watched him go. Something moved through her before she could catch it. There and gone, too fast to name. "Talk," she said. The man took a breath. 2.5 years ago, he said, my son was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. His heart wall was thickening. He was 6 years old. His cardiologists told me that without surgery within 8 to 10 months, the odds shifted in the wrong direction fast. Sloan said nothing. Watching him, I was working 2 jobs. I had insurance, not the kind that covered what he needed. The gap between what I had and what the surgery cost was not closable. Not by me. Not in that time frame. He paused. I applied to every assistance program I could find. Most had waiting lists. The ones that didn't had criteria I didn't meet, or they'd already exhausted their funding for the year. He stopped. I was out of options. I'm telling you this not to make it dramatic. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what it meant when Harwick General called me. The billing office said an anonymous donor had covered the full cost of Owen's surgery. Pre-op. The procedure. 3 nights in the ICU. All follow-up appointments. Everything. Sloan's expression hadn't moved. But something behind it had. I didn't know who it was, Garrett continued. The hospital said the donor had requested complete anonymity. I asked several times. They wouldn't say, so I took my son to surgery and I sat in a waiting room for 9 hours, and when they told me it went well, I went to a hospital bathroom and cried for about 15 minutes. Then I went and held Owen's hand. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. The watch came about a week later, padded envelope, no return address. Inside was the watch and a small note card. I made a copy. I keep the original at home. He held it out. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. The handwriting was confident, slightly cramped. The kind that moved fast, that didn't second-guess itself. She stared at it. Her face went completely still. You don't know me, and that's all right. I heard about your boy through a friend of a friend. I know this doesn't fix everything, but I hope it gives him a chance. Take good care of him. That's the only repayment I want. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. She stopped it from trembling. There was no other name, Garrett said. Just the initial, but the watch was engraved. I spent about 3 months tracking it down, a brief mention in a local business column, then an obituary. By the time I found the name, Warren Hargrove had already been in the ground for 2 months. I found the cemetery not long after that, and I've been coming here since February 2022. Sloan looked up from the note card. And you've been coming every month since then, she said. Yes. She looked down at the note card again. Then up. I don't know this handwriting. The words came out wrong. She tried again. I mean, I recognize it. It's his. It's definitely his. But I have never seen this note before. I didn't know about a donation. She looked at Garrett directly. The composure held but barely, at the edges. My husband never told me any of this. The silence that followed was not comfortable. I'm sorry, Garrett said. I assumed you knew. Don't apologize, she exhaled. I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. I've told you what I know. That's all of it, is it? Not a question. The kind of statement that means the person isn't entirely sure they believe you yet and is deciding whether it matters. She looked back at the headstone Warren Hargrove, 1978 to 2022. How do I know any of this is true? She said. You don't. Not right now. But Owen has a surgical scar. I have the original note card. The hospital has records. He paused. I'm not here for anything. I never tried to find you. I came here because I didn't know how else to say thank you to someone who saved my son's life. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted someone to know what it meant, even if he can't hear it anymore. Sloan Hargrove stared at him for a long moment, then she said, I want to see the scar. Owen was on the bench near the gate exactly where Garrett had sent him, kicking his heels against the wooden slats, watching a pigeon investigate something near the fence post. He looked up when he heard footsteps. Garrett first, then the woman in the charcoal blazer, a few feet behind Owen. Garrett sat beside him. I need to ask you something. Okay, is it all right if I show this woman your scar? Owen studied Sloan the way he studied math problems. Methodically, no rushing. Why does she want to see it? Because she needs to believe something I told her. What did you tell her? That it's there. A pause. Then Owen looked at Sloan directly. It's from my heart surgery, he said, with the matter-of-fact ease of a kid who'd explained this enough times that it no longer embarrassed him. I was 6. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just looks a little weird. Sloan crouched down, bringing herself to his eye level. Something shifted in her face when she did it. Involuntary. She clearly hadn't intended it. What's your favorite subject in school, she asked. Owen blinked. Not the question he'd been expecting. Math, he said. And lunch. A sound came out of Sloan that was nearly a laugh but didn't quite finish the journey. Fair enough, she said. Owen lifted his shirt to just below his collarbone. The scar was pale and slightly raised, running vertically for a few inches. Real, undeniable. Sloan looked at it for a long time. Long enough that Owen glanced at his father with an expression that asked whether this was normal. Then she stood back up. "I want you to come to my house," she said to Garrett. "There are things there, journals, personal records of Warrens that I haven't fully gone through." She stopped, started again. "I think you need to see some of them. And I think I need someone in the room who understands the context when I do." Garrett studied her. "Can I bring Owen?" "Of course." Owen dropped his shirt and looked up at his father. "Are we going somewhere?" "Looks like it," Garrett said. The drive to the Hargrove house took 22 minutes. Owen spent most of it with his forehead against the passenger window, watching the neighborhoods change as they moved from Harwick's east side through the middle of the city and out toward the reservoir area, where the houses grew larger and the spaces between them started to breathe. He didn't ask questions, which meant he was storing them. Garrett followed Sloan's black sedan. His hands were steady on the wheel, his jaw was not. He was doing the thing he did in situations too large to process in real time, focusing on what was directly in front of him and refusing to think beyond it until he had more information. He'd learned that skill in a hospital waiting room. It had served him reasonably well since. The Hargrove house was a large gray stone structure set back from the road behind a long driveway lined with young trees. Clean architectural lines. Expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. The kind of house that said everything quietly, which was how you ended up leaning in to hear it. Inside, a woman named Fran nodded at Sloan with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned not to look surprised by anything. Sloan led them through a front hall. Pale hardwood floors, one large coastal photograph on the wall, into a sitting room furnished in gray and navy. "Sit wherever you like," Sloan said to Owen. "Fran can get you something from the kitchen." Owen sat on the edge of the gray sofa and looked around with careful eyes. "Is this your house?" "It is, it's very clean," he said. "Owen," Garrett said. "It's a compliment," Owen said. Sloan looked at the boy. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it. Owen seemed to decide this was acceptable. She turned to Garrett. "The study is upstairs. His personal things are there. Most of it I moved up after she stopped. "I wasn't ready to go through it. And then I got busy, and then more time passed." "You don't have to do this today," Garrett said. "I want to," short, cutting off the rest of what he was going to say. "They went upstairs. The study told you something the moment you walked in, not in a curated way. This was a room that had been used. The desk was large and wooden and covered in the organized disorder of someone who knew exactly where everything was. The bookshelf held business texts and paperback novels with cracked spines mixed together without apology. A cardboard box in the corner still had packing tape on it. On the window ledge, a small succulent in a terracotta pot had died, dried out completely. Nobody had been in this room in a long time. Sloan stood in the doorway. Garrett stood behind her and understood they were both giving her a moment. She walked in. On the left wall, a shelf held a row of identical dark green journals, each labeled on the spine with a year in compact, slightly cramped handwriting. 8 of them, starting in 2014 and ending with 2022. She went to them, ran one finger along the spines, then she pulled out the one labeled 2021, sat in the desk chair, opened it. Garrett took the smaller chair against the wall, the guest chair, clearly meant for whoever came to discuss things with Warren Hargrove in this room, and looked around while she read. On the corner of the desk, a small framed photograph had been pushed to one side. A younger Sloan, hair longer, standing beside a man with an easy smile and something heavy behind his eyes. The weight of someone who thought more than he said. They were somewhere coastal. She was laughing at something. He was watching her laugh. Garrett looked away from the photograph. "Here," Sloan said. Her voice had changed. He crossed the room and stood beside the desk. She moved the journal so he could see. The entry was dated 13 months before Owen's surgery. Not about Owen. About a different child entirely. A 4-year-old in rural Pennsylvania whose family had started a crowdfunding campaign for a bone marrow procedure. The campaign had barely reached 10% of its goal. The entry was 2 short paragraphs. The second ended with, "Sent something through the usual account. Never feels like enough. Didn't leave my name. Easier that way. For them and for me." Sloan turned pages, found another, A 7-year-old in Harwick, house fire, family uninsured. The entry noted the hospital, the name of a contact Warren had cultivated inside and at the bottom. Made sure it was handled. They won't know it was me. That's fine. She kept turning. Each entry revealed another child, another family, another quiet act conducted without telling anyone, logged with the meticulous care of a man who treated generosity the same way he treated everything else. Seriously. Systematically. In private, how far back does it go? Garrett asked. Sloan looked at the shelf, counted the spines. 8 years, she said, 8 years. Hers to discover only now. She put the journal down and pressed both hands flat on the desk. Stared at the wall across from her. I didn't know, she said. No, Garrett agreed. I thought I knew how he spent his time. I knew about the business, the public work. The party he supported openly. She stopped. I didn't know about any of this. Why do you think he didn't tell you? She picked the journal back up, found the entry about Owen, midway through the 2021 volume. Warren had written, the boy, 6 years old, cardiac condition, father works logistics, mother not in the picture. He'd noted the amount donated, the hospital, the surgery date, and then, 2 months later, a follow-up in the same hand. Hospital contact says the surgery went well. He's doing well. Good. Just that. 2 words and a period. Sloan read those words and Garrett watched her read them, and neither of them said anything for a while. I think, Sloan finally said quietly, that there were things Warren carried alone. Things he believed I couldn't understand or wouldn't. She picked each word up carefully before setting it down. Our marriage in those last few years was not what it had been. We were successful and busy, and we had stopped talking. Not really talking, not the way you're supposed to. She closed the journal. I think he found something here that he wasn't finding at home. A way to feel like what he was doing mattered. It did matter, Garrett said. I know. She looked at him. I'm not angry at him. I don't know exactly what I am, but it isn't angry. Garrett glanced at the photograph on the desk again. The younger version of this woman laughing at something. The man watching her. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. When he died, was there warning? Or car accident, Sloan said. January 2022. He was driving back from a site visit. A truck ran a red light. A pause. No warning. He left that morning, and I was in a meeting when my assistant came in. She looked at her hands. I didn't cry for 3 days. Not at the funeral. I was so far into shock it took 3 days before it started feeling real. So am I. She looked at the shelf again, then stood and moved to pull out the final journal, the most recent year. She opened it near the back, to the last entry. Whatever she read, her face did something she couldn't manage. Not crying. The thing that comes before it. When the body understands what the mind is still catching up to, he was going to talk to me, she said. The day after this entry, she held the journal out to Garrett. The last entry was dated January 14, 2022. The day before Warren Hargrove's fatal accident. Garrett read it, then read it again, handed it back and sat down. Neither of them said anything. The room held them in silence. Owen was asleep on the grey sofa when Garrett came back downstairs an hour later, curled up with his jacket folded under his head. Shoes still on, because Owen had never once removed his shoes before sleeping, and Garrett had long ago accepted this as a fact of life. Fran had put a light blanket over him. He was breathing steadily, fully committed to sleep in the way only children manage. Garrett stood in the doorway and looked at his son for a long moment. Then Sloan came downstairs and stood beside him. They both looked at the sleeping boy. And the silence between them was a different kind of silence than the one at the cemetery 2 hours ago. He has your nose, Sloan said. His mother's chin, Garrett said. Or so I'm told. A pause. He talked about the scar without any embarrassment. He's been through enough that he doesn't waste energy on it anymore. Garrett watched Owen breathe. He had to grow up a little fast. I try to slow that down when I can, but you can't control all of it. No, Sloan said. You can't. She looked at Garrett. He could feel it without turning. I want to ask you something, she said. All right. What do you do for work? He turned then. Logistics coordination, mid-size freight company. Making sure shipments get where they need to go, solving problems when they don't. Is that what you've always done? Before Owen's surgery, I was doing dock work. When he came home from the hospital, I needed more predictable hours, so I went back to school online. Logistics certification, 2 years, working nights. She studied him. The wariness from the cemetery had shifted into something else, more like recalibration. Why did you really come to the grave, she said. Not the practical answer, the real one. I told you the real one. You told me part of it. There are easier ways to say thank you. You could have donated to a charity in his name, left flowers once, moved on. You've been coming every month for 2 years. That's not just gratitude. That's something else. Garrett looked at Owen. When the surgery was over and I knew he was going to be okay, I had this feeling I couldn't shake. Not just relief, something bigger. Someone had looked at a kid they'd never met and decided that kid deserved to live. A complete stranger, no obligation, no reason, no recognition. He paused. I couldn't file that away. I needed Owen to grow up knowing that a person made that choice for him. Even if he never knew who, even if it was just standing at a grave and saying it out loud, a beat. I also wanted someone to know what it actually meant. Not to a statistic, not to a hospital invoice. To a specific kid who argues about Barretos and aces his spelling tests and is currently asleep on your sofa with his shoes on. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm glad you came. It cost her something to say it. He could hear that, so am I, Garrett said. She looked at her hands, then out at the middle distance. He wrote about Owen, she said, not by name, but in enough detail that I knew exactly who he meant the moment I read it. He checked on Owen's progress 3 times through his hospital contact. He knew when Owen was discharged. He knew when the 6-month follow-up came back clean. She paused. He was careful to stay anonymous. But he wasn't indifferent. He was watching from a distance. Garrett thought about the man in the photograph on the desk, the easy smile, the heavy eyes. Writing in cramped handwriting late at night about a child he'd never met, checking in like a lookout who never announced himself, never expected anything back. What was he like? Garrett asked. Sloan's considered the question for a long time. Complicated, she said. Kind in ways he never showed publicly. Ambitious in ways that didn't always leave room for other things. Better at fixing other people's problems than the ones directly in front of him. A pause. But he was trying. I can see that now, in the journals. He was always trying. Even when neither of us knew how to say we were struggling, Owen shifted on the sofa. Pulled the blanket tighter without waking. He wrote about a foundation, Garrett said. Yes, he'd been circling back to the idea for years. He knew he couldn't keep going one family at a time. He wanted something structured. Something that would work even after he was gone, she said the last part plainly. He didn't get to build it. No, Garrett looked at her. What are you going to do with what you found today? Sloan looked at the ceiling above the study, as if she could see the journals through it. I don't know yet, she said. I need to read more. Understand how much of this I missed. And then decide what to do with the things he left unfinished. From the sofa, Owen made a small sound in his sleep. Garrett looked at his son's face. Easy and unbothered by the weight the 2 adults in the room were carrying, and he felt the thing he'd felt in the hospital bathroom after the surgeon came out and said it went well. Not joy exactly, not relief exactly, something bigger than both. Gratitude so large it had nowhere to go. He'd been carrying it to a grave every month, leaving it in carnations and quiet sentences. Maybe, he thought, that was about to change. Owen woke up the way he always did, all at once, eyes open, scanning. He sat up on the grey sofa, the borrowed blanket around his waist, and looked at the ceiling, the walls, his father in the chair across from him. Where are we? Still at Ms. Hargrove's house, Owen recalibrated. I fell asleep. You did? Did I snore? A little. You're lying, probably, Garrett admitted. Owen pushed the blanket off and sat up properly, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. His hair was flattened on one side. He looked at the doorway, where Sloan had been before she'd excused herself to make a call. Then he looked at his father with the expression he used when he'd been holding a question. That lady, he said. She's the wife of the man whose grave we visit? Yes, she didn't know about us? No, she didn't. Owen processed this. That's weird it is. Is she okay? Garrett looked toward the doorway. Somewhere in the back of the house, the low murmur of Sloan's voice on a call. Clipped, authoritative. The voice of someone who ran things. I don't think she's used to being caught off guard, Garrett said. So probably not entirely. But she's handling it. Owen thought about this. Is she nice? I think she's complicated. That's what adults say when they don't know if someone is nice or not. Yeah, Garrett said. It is. Owen looked at the dried succulent on the window ledge, stared at it. The white mineral ring around the base of the pot. The brittle, forgotten stems. Dad, yeah, the man whose grave we visit. He paid for my surgery because he wanted to. Nobody made him, that's right. And he never told anybody. Not that we know of. Owen nodded slowly. Something settling internally. That's the right way to do it, he he said. If you help someone just so people will know you helped them, that's not really helping. That's showing off. Garrett looked at his son. Where did you hear that? Nowhere. I thought of it, you just thought of it. Yeah. Garrett was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. That's exactly right. Owen seemed satisfied. He reached for his sneaker, which had come partially unlaced while he slept, and began retying it with the methodical focus he brought to any task requiring both hands. Garrett watched him, and felt the familiar pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with fear anymore, and everything to do with the specific weight of loving someone you cannot protect from everything. Sloane's footsteps came down the stairs. She came in still holding her phone. Something in how she carried herself had shifted. Not looser. That word wasn't right for this woman. Less armored, maybe. Like she'd spent the past 30 minutes setting something down that she'd been holding up for a long time, and her body hadn't yet adjusted to the change. She looked at Owen. You're awake, I'm retying my shoe, he confirmed without looking up. So you are. She sat in the chair near the window. Not close, just angled into the room. I had to cancel something this afternoon, said without apology. Just information. I called Harwick General, billing department. Asked about a large anonymous donation from approximately 2.5 years ago. Garrett said nothing. They couldn't confirm donor identity, privacy protocols. But they confirmed the donation existed, the amount, the procedure it covered. She glanced at Owen, who had finished his shoe and was now listening openly, because Owen had never once pretended not to listen. Consistent with what you described. Okay, Garrett said. I also looked at Warren's financial records. I have full access to the estate accounts. I found a transfer from a personal account he maintained separately from our joint finances. An account I knew existed but had never looked into out of. She paused. Respect, I suppose, for his privacy. The amount and the date match exactly. The room was quiet, so it's confirmed, Garrett said. It's confirmed. Owen looked between them. What's confirmed? That the man we visit at the cemetery, Garrett said, is definitely the person who paid for your surgery. Owen absorbed this. I already thought it was him, I know. But now we're sure. Okay, he reached for his jacket. Then stopped, looked at Sloan. Can I ask you something? Go ahead, Sloan said. What was he like? Not the business stuff. Just, what was he like at home? Sloan was quiet long enough that Garrett thought she might redirect. She didn't. He was a terrible cook, she said. He knew maybe 4 recipes and overestimated his ability with all of them. He kept buying ingredients for things he was going to make and then not making them, so the refrigerator was always full of things that eventually had to be thrown out. A pause. He laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them, which should have been annoying, and sometimes it was, but mostly it just made you want to hear the rest of the joke. Owen smiled at that. That's a good thing, it was, Sloan said. Something moved through her face that she wasn't fully managing. He also got very focused. When he was working on something, everything else disappeared for him. Dinner, conversations, plans. He wasn't ignoring you. He just went somewhere deep inside whatever he was working on. Hard to pull him back out. Dad does that, Owen said. I don't do that, Garrett said. You absolutely do that. I have to say your name like 3 times sometimes. Sloane's mouth curved. Then you understand, she said to Owen. Yeah, Owen said, it's annoying. But you get used to it. Garrett decided not to pursue this. Owen stood, shrugged on his jacket and looked at Sloan. Can we come back sometime? Sloan looked at the boy. Yes, she said. You can come back. Owen nodded. Already filed, already decided. They walked to the front door. Owen shook Sloane's hand at the threshold with the formal gravity he'd recently started bringing to exits, which Garrett suspected came from a video about professional conduct or a game at school. Sloan shook it back with equal formality, said it had been a pleasure. Owen said likewise. Garrett had to look at the ceiling briefly. He shook her hand as well. First time they'd actually touched. Her grip was firm and brief. Her hand was cool from the phone she'd set down a moment ago. Thank you for not having us removed at the cemetery, he said. I thought about it. I could tell. She held his gaze. I'll be in touch. I need time to go through everything, but I will. You don't have to, I know. The same flat certainty she brought to everything she meant. But I will. They walked to the truck. Owen climbed in and buckled up and pressed his face against the passenger window, watching the Hargrove house as Garrett backed down the driveway. She's lonely, Owen said. Garrett pulled onto the road. What makes you say that? The house is too clean. People with a lot going on don't have houses that clean. Things get left around, he considered. Also, nobody's touched that chess set in a while. You could tell from the pieces. Garrett looked at the road ahead. When did you start noticing things like that? Owen shrugged. I don't know. It's just obvious. It's not obvious to most people. Then most people aren't paying attention. Garrett drove. The city unfolded around them as they moved back east. Houses smaller, signs louder. The spaces between buildings shrinking back down to the scale of his ordinary life. Their building came into view. Brick, 6 floors. The laundry exhaust on the second floor that always smelled like dryer sheets when you passed it on the sidewalk. Dad, yeah, that man, Owen said, Warren. He spent years helping kids and never told anyone. Not even her. A pause. Do you think she's going to do something about it? Not just feel sad, actually do something. Garrett parked. Cut the engine, I don't know yet, he said. I hope so. Owen unclipped his seatbelt. It would be a waste to find all that out and just be sad about it. He opened the door and dropped to the curb and started toward the building entrance. One look back. Then gone. Garrett sat in the quiet truck, the straightforward certainty of it. His son saying hard things like they were simple. Not because he didn't understand the complexity, because he'd decided the complexity was beside the point. He got out of the truck, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't know exactly what came next. He found somewhere underneath that uncertainty that this didn't feel like a bad thing. Sloan read until 4 in the morning. She hadn't planned to. She'd planned to go through the 2 journals she'd brought downstairs, make notes, be in bed by midnight. Reasonable, controlled, the kind of plan that made sense when you were the kind of person who made plans and kept them. That plan lasted until about 9 o'clock, which was when she found herself back upstairs in the study with all 8 journals spread across Warren's desk, working through them in order. A legal pad at her elbow, filling with dates and names, and the quiet details of a life she had shared a house with for 11 years, and somehow not fully known. The room smelled like him, cedar and something faintly mineral. His aftershave, or whatever it was. She'd been running from that smell for 18 months. Ducking in and out of this room in under 4 minutes each time, grabbing what she needed, and leaving before it could settle into her coat, her hair, the inside of her lungs. Tonight she had been here for hours, and it still hurt. But it was no longer unbearable. That was something. The journals were not confessional. Warren was not a man who wrote emotionally. He wrote observationally, practically, with the spare economy of someone who used language as a tool rather than an outlet. But the entries were consistent. Every donation logged. Every family noted in enough detail to become real. A father working 2 jobs. A mother who sat in a waiting room for 9 hours. A child who came out of surgery and went home and presumably grew up and did all the ordinary things a child does when they get to keep doing them. She found a name she recognized in the 3rd journal. A family she had met at a charity gala 2 years before Warren died. They'd been held up as a success story for a different foundation entirely. Warren and Sloan had been seated 3 tables away. She remembered the father's voice breaking slightly during his speech. She remembered Warren handing her his cocktail napkin without a word because she'd already used hers. Here, in Warren's cramped handwriting, a note that he had made an anonymous contribution to their son's treatment 6 months before that gala. He had been in that room, listening to a family thank an organization for help that had come partly, quietly, from him. He had handed her his cocktail napkin and said nothing. Sloan pressed her hand flat on the page. She sat with that for a long time. He hadn't told her because, and this was the part she kept circling back to, kept having to approach from a different angle, because looking at it directly cost something. Because by the time he'd started doing this in earnest, they had already stopped being the kind of couple who told each other things that mattered, not dramatically. Nothing dramatic had happened between them, just the slow, ordinary accumulation of days where both of them were too busy and too tired and too proud to sit down and say, I'm struggling, I'm lonely, I don't know how to reach you anymore. I'm afraid if I say that out loud something will break that we can't fix. Scattered between the donation entries were personal notes. Brief, dated late at night. She almost missed them because they were so short and so unlike the rest of his writing, which was always purposeful, always going somewhere. V was in New York again this week. The house feels wrong when it's empty brought up the counseling idea again tonight. She changed the subject. I don't know how to keep trying without feeling like I'm pushing someone who doesn't want to be pushed. Maybe I should stop trying. I don't want to stop trying. We had dinner together last Tuesday. First time in almost 3 weeks, we both sat down at the same table. It was fine. It was civil. I hate that fine and civil is what we're at. I remember when we weren't. Sloan read these and sat with them. She had known the marriage was struggling. She had known, not from any conversation they'd had, because those conversations had become too loaded and both of them too exhausted and too afraid of what honest answers might cost. But in the ambient, wordless way you know things you've been refusing to look at directly, she had buried herself in work. He had apparently buried himself in the quiet project of repairing other people's broken situations when he couldn't repair his own. She didn't know whether to be angry at him for that. She decided she wasn't angry. She was sad, which was different and somehow harder to carry. The final entry was the one she kept returning to. She read it again now, alone in the study at 2 a.m, and it landed the same way each time. The handwriting was slightly messier than usual, tired. He'd noted the time at the top, which he almost never did, 11:47 p.m. January 14, 2022, the night before the accident. I've been thinking about the foundation idea for a month solid now. Not just thinking, planning. There are too many of them. One at a time isn't enough. It was never going to be enough doing it this way. I want to build something real, a structure. Not a charity that spends half its intake on overhead and the other half on looking good. Something that actually reaches the families falling through every gap there is. I think I know who could help. There's a woman at Harwick General, in the billing department. She's been my contact there for 6 years. She understands what these families actually need, what the system looks like from the inside. And Sloan, if I can explain it right, if I can actually sit down and talk to her the way I used to be able to talk to her. I'm going to try tomorrow. I've been circling around it for months because I was afraid she'd think it was small. But I don't think she'd think that. I think I've just been afraid of sitting across from her and being honest about something for the first time in a long time. She's asleep. I can hear her from the hallway. I'm going to finish this and then sleep. And tomorrow I'm going to drive home from the site visit and sit down and actually talk to her. If she says no, she says no. But I think she might say yes. He never came home from the site visit. Sloan closed the journal. She sat in the dark study for a long time after that. The lamp had gone off on its timer and she hadn't turned it back on. She pulled out her phone, opened a new note, wrote one line. What would it cost to set up a foundation properly? Call the estate lawyer Monday. Then she put the phone face down on the desk. Outside, the city was doing what it always did at 2 a.m. Half asleep, half restless. A car moving slowly through the neighborhood below. A streetlight cycling through its meaningless yellow at an empty intersection. Normal. Ordinary. Completely indifferent to what had shifted in this room tonight. She picked the phone back up. She did not call Garrett. It was 2 a.m. and she was not the kind of person who called people at 2 a.m, even when something large had rearranged the furniture of her understanding. But she wrote a second line beneath the first. Ask Garrett Merritt what families actually need when they hit the system. He knows it from the inside. That matters. She put the phone down. For the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like the house was too quiet around her. She felt like she was standing at the beginning of something, not comfortable, not easy. She had no idea where it went, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. That was enough to start. He almost let it go to voicemail. Monday morning, 8:47. Garrett was 10 minutes from the freight office, coffee going cold in the cup holder the way it always did. He always forgot about it until too late. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown number. He glanced at it, thought about the 9 o'clock meeting, the report he hadn't finished. Then he picked up. This is Garrett. It's Sloan Hargrove, a beat. I hope this isn't a bad time. I'm driving. Give me a second. He pulled into the lot of a gas station on Clement Street and cut the engine. The coffee was definitely cold now. I'm here, he said. I went through all of them, she said. All 8 journals. I finished around 4 this morning. Garrett looked at the gas station window. A hand-lettered sign. $4.99 breakfast special before 10. All 8, he said. Yes, a pause. How are you doing? She didn't answer immediately, which, from what he already understood about Sloan Hargrove, meant the answer wasn't simple. I've been better, she said. I've also been worse. Somewhere in the middle said the way she said most things. Even, factual. A weather report, not a confession. I want to move forward with the foundation. I've already called my estate lawyer, meeting with him Wednesday to discuss the legal structure. But before I go any further, I need to talk to you about what? About what you actually know from your side of it. A pause. You were the person in the waiting room. You filled out the applications that went nowhere. You were inside the system in a way I have never been and never will be. I need to understand that before I start making decisions about how to fix it. Garrett looked at the crack running along the lower right corner of his dashboard. He'd been meaning to deal with that for 2 years. All right, he said. When are you free this evening? I need to pick Owen up from school at 3:30. Bring him. A beat. Fran makes something she calls pasta. Owen will probably have opinions about it. There was a dryness to the way she said it, not quite a joke. But in the neighborhood of one, Garrett found himself almost smiling at the steering wheel. I'll ask him, he said. He has opinions about most things, I've noticed, Sloan said. And that was that. He put the truck back in drive. The gas station lot gave way to the morning street, ordinary and indifferent. He had a 9 o'clock meeting and a cold coffee and a crack in his dashboard that'd been there for 2 years. Some things you dealt with. Some things you just drove around. He kept driving. Owen did, in fact, have opinions about Fran's pasta. Specifically, the sauce needed more red pepper flakes. He delivered this verdict to Fran directly in the kitchen, with the tone of genuine culinary consultation rather than complaint. Fran, who was in her late 50s and had worked for the Hargrove household for 12 years, and had survived Warren's enthusiastic food commentary and Sloan's near-total indifference to cooking, looked at this 8-year-old who had wandered into her kitchen like he'd been coming here his whole life, and laughed for the first time in what felt like months. She added the red pepper flakes. Owen ate 2 full bowls. While this was happening at the kitchen table, Garrett and Sloan sat in the study upstairs. She had organized things since Sunday. The journals stacked in order on one side of the desk. The legal pad had opened to a page already covered in notes. The desk itself partially cleared. Not fully. Still Warren's organized chaos underneath, but enough surface created that 2 people could work. The framed photograph of the 2 of them at the coast was still there. Sloan had moved it slightly. It now faced more toward the window than the center of the room. Garrett noticed. Said nothing. Walk me through the financial side, Sloan said, uncapping a pen. Not abstractly. From the beginning, when Owen was diagnosed, Garrett had not talked about this in detail with anyone in 2.5 years. Not because it was too painful. He'd processed most of it by now. But because the people in his life were not people who needed the details. And because he was not someone who offered more than was asked for, he folded his hands on the desk. The diagnosis came in July 2021, he said. Owen was 6, almost 7. He'd been getting winded faster than other kids when he played outside. Pediatrician referred us to a cardiologist. Echocardiogram. That's when we found out. Sloan was already writing. The cardiologist gave us a timeline, 8 to 10 months before the risk curve shifted significantly. The surgery Owen needed was a septal myectomy, specialized cardiac procedure. Maybe a dozen hospitals in the country do it with consistently strong outcomes. Harwick General was one of them. Lucky for us in terms of location, what was the total cost? Close to $140,000. The procedure, pre-surgical workup, ICU time, recovery follow-up protocol. Sloan wrote the number down. My insurance was through the freight company, Garrett continued. It covered a portion of cardiac procedures but had a cap on specialized surgical interventions. The coverage would have paid roughly $42,000. That left me responsible for close to $100,000 on a logistics coordinator's salary. With a 6-year-old, what did you try? Everything I could find, said without drama, just the fact of it. The hospital had a financial assistance program. I qualified for partial aid. They'd reduce the bill by 20% for households under a certain income threshold. That brought the gap down to about $78,000. Still not closable. What about grants? Foundations? I kept a spreadsheet. He said it with the particular grimness of someone who still remembered that spreadsheet clearly. Every row, every rejection notice. There are a lot of organizations set up to help families in these situations. What I learned very fast is that most of them are underfunded relative to actual need. Most have waiting lists of 3 to 12 months. Most have eligibility criteria that are either very narrow or require documentation that takes weeks to compile. Time you didn't have, right? Some were diagnosis specific. There was one foundation that covered cardiac procedures but only for children under 5. Owen was 6. One covered the exact procedure he needed, but only for families in 3 specific states, and we weren't in any of them. One had an application process that required a letter of medical necessity, 2 years of tax returns, written statements from both the primary care physician and the specialist, and proof of insurance denial. Their next review cycle was 8 months out. He paused. 8 months was the outside of the window my son had. Sloan looked at what she'd written, then at Garrett. So the system isn't absent, she said. It's misaligned, that's one way to put it. He thought about it. There's money out there. There are people who genuinely want to help. But the structure is designed around what's comfortable for the organizations, not around what families actually need. Application processes are complicated because it protects against fraud. I understand that. Eligibility windows are narrow because it's easier to have a defined focus area. I understand that too. But when you're the parent sitting across from a cardiologist being told your kid has a shrinking window, none of that understanding changes anything. He stopped. What matters is, can I get someone to say yes in the next 60 days? And nobody said yes in 60 days. Nobody said yes at all. The donation came while I was still working through the list. Sloan was quiet for a moment. Then, Warren found you through his contact at the hospital. That's what I assumed, based on how he described other cases in the journals. He had someone inside the billing department who knew what to look for, a woman named Bette Calloway, Sloan said. She's in the journals by first name starting in year 2. I looked her up. She's still at Harwick General. Same department, Garrett looked at her. You've done a lot of research in the last 48 hours. I didn't sleep much. No complaint in it. Just information. I also pulled publicly available data, hospital financial reports, charitable overhead ratios, pediatric specialty procedure costs in this region. If I'm going to build something, I need to understand the actual landscape first. What did you find? That in this county alone, in any given year, there are somewhere between 60 and 80 pediatric cases that fit your son's profile. Diagnosis requiring specialized intervention, family income too high for Medicaid. Insurance with a gap that makes the net cost unmanageable, and a time constraint that makes the standard assistance pipeline useless. She turned the legal pad so he could see the number she'd written and circled, 60 to 80 children. Per year, this county alone. Pediatric cardiac and oncology cases only. That's conservative, she added. It doesn't count surrounding counties, doesn't count other specialties. Doesn't count families who never made it far enough through the application process to appear in any data at all. Garrett looked at the number. That's a lot of kids, he said. It's a lot of kids, Sloan agreed. She stood and went to the window. The late afternoon light was going amber over the hedges along the driveway. She stood with her back to him. One arm crossed over her body, the other hand at her chin. Warren was solving one at a time, she said. He reached maybe 30 cases over 8 years. One person working privately, limited by what one person could do. She turned. If I build this correctly, proper funding structure, faster intake, we could be handling 60 cases a year within the first 2 years of operation. Maybe more. What does building it correctly look like? She came back to the desk, turned to a clean page on the legal pad, fast intake, maximum 14 days from first contact to funding decision. Streamlined application, medical necessity letter from the specialist, basic financial documentation, insurance coverage summary. 3 documents, not 10. The vetting happens quickly because the criteria are clear and consistent. What are the criteria? Pediatric cases only. Specialized procedure with documented urgency. There has to be a time component. That's what separates these from cases the existing pipeline can handle. Family income and coverage gap that puts the net cost beyond reasonable reach. That's the core of it. No geographic restriction within the state, no diagnosis-specific limitation. If the child needs it and can't access it in time, that's the criterion. Garrett looked at what she was writing. You're missing something, he said. She looked up. The families who don't know to apply, he said it evenly. When you're in it, working 2 jobs, sick kid, paperwork at midnight, because that's the only hour you have, you don't always know what exists. I found most of those foundations through a social worker at the hospital who handed me a printout that was 2 years out of date, a beat. A lot of families never even get the printout. Sloan went still. So the intake has to come from the other direction, she said, partially. if you have someone inside the hospital who knows what to look for. The way Warren had Bet Calloway, you're catching families who might not find you on their own. She'd know others too, Sloan said. Other departments, others hospitals. She wrote this down, then stopped, set the pen down. Would you be willing to work on this with me? Direct. No preamble. The question placed on the desk like a document. Garrett looked at her. In what capacity? You understand the family side of this in a way I don't and never will. I can build the financial architecture. I can navigate the legal structure, the funding, the board. What I can't do is sit across from a family in crisis and know what they actually need versus what looks good on a program description. She held his gaze. I need someone who knows the difference between a policy that reads well and one that actually works for the people it's supposed to help. You know that difference? Garrett thought about the spreadsheet. $78,000 and a deadline and a 6-year-old who didn't know yet what his father was carrying in those months. I have a full-time job, he said. I'm not asking you to quit it. Not yet. Advise on the intake criteria, the application process, the family communication. Time commitment is whatever you can give. She paused, compensated. Obviously, I'm not doing it for compensation, I know. I'm paying you anyway. Because I'm not building something on someone's goodwill. That's how foundations fall apart, he almost argued. Then he saw she was right. All right, he said. She nodded once. Decision made, moving on. But underneath the efficiency of it, Garrett could see. Because he'd been watching her for 2 days now and had started to learn the signals she didn't know she was broadcasting, that it mattered to her. That she'd been up until 4 in the morning not just because she was processing grief, but because she had finally found something to do with it, and she was not going to let the momentum go. One more thing, she said. Okay. She looked at the legal pad. I want to name it after him, not to turn it into a monument, but he spent 8 years doing this quietly and nobody knew. And I think, she stopped, tried again. I think he deserved to be known for it. Not the business, not the acquisition record. This, Garrett was quiet for a moment. He'd have hated it, he said. Sloan looked up sharply. Naming it after him, Garrett said. Based on what you've described. Based on the journals. He specifically didn't want his name on anything. Sloan held his gaze. Then slowly the corners of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not the opposite of one, something complicated sitting between the two. You're probably right, she said. So name it after the idea. Not the person, what idea? That the next child gets a chance. He shrugged. Something like that. Something that says what it does without putting anyone's name on it. Sloan looked at the legal pad. Wrote. Next Chance Foundation looked at it. It's not bad, she said. It's not final, Garrett said. But it's not bad. The meeting with Bet Calloway happened the following Monday. Sloan had arranged it through Harwick General's development office, framing it as a donor consultation, which was technically accurate. But when Bet Calloway arrived at the Hargrove house, a compact woman in her early 60s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, carrying the direct, unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades watching people find or fail to find help in the worst moments of their lives. Sloan did not start with the donor pitch. She started with the journals showed Bet the entries, the ones that named her, or something close enough that there was no question who Warren meant. Sloan watched the woman's face move through recognition, then through something beyond recognition. A grief she had clearly been carrying privately for well over a year. He told you about me, Bet said. Not quite a question. He didn't tell me anything, Sloan said. He told his journals. I found them last week. Bet was quiet. She took her reading glasses off her head and turned them in her hands. He called me every few months, she said. For 6 years we had a system. I'd flag cases that fit certain parameters, urgent timeline, coverage gap, no viable path through standard channels, pass along anonymized information. He'd make the call about whether to fund, a pause. He never wanted to know the families personally. He just wanted to know they were okay after. Did you know he'd died? Found out about a week after. Bet turned the glasses in her hands. I didn't contact you. I didn't know how. Didn't know whether you knew what he was doing, or whether it would. She stopped. I didn't know what to do with it. So I didn't do anything. You weren't wrong to be cautious, Sloan said. Maybe. But I kept flagging cases for about 4 months after he died. Out of habit. There was nobody on the other end anymore, said simply. But the weight of it was clear. I eventually stopped. Sloan placed the legal pad on the coffee table between them. Bet looked at it. Read what was on it. Read it again. This is real, she said. Yes, I met with my estate lawyer last Wednesday. We have a proposed structure and a timeline for the non-profit filing. Sloan leaned forward. What I need from you is the intake side. What you know about identifying the right cases quickly. Who else in the hospital system I should be talking to. What the process needs to look like so that families are found before they run out of time. Bet was quiet for a long moment, then. You should know there's a case right now. I've been sitting on it for 3 weeks because there was nothing I could do with it. Sloan went very still. Tell me, 7-year-old girl. Wilms tumor, kidney cancer. Requires a specialized surgical approach available at a center in Philadelphia. The surgery and follow-up protocol runs to about $160,000. Her parents are both working. Combined income just above the Medicaid threshold. Insurance covering about half. They have 8 weeks before the surgical window closes. 8 weeks. The oncologist says ideally 6, Bet added. The room was quiet. Sloan looked at the legal pad. The foundation did not legally exist yet. The filing would take several weeks minimum. No board, no formal intake process. No infrastructure beyond a legal pad full of notes and a meeting with an estate lawyer. What she had was money. Her own. In accounts she could access today. Send me the anonymized case file, she said. Today if you can. Bet studied her. You're going to fund it out of pocket before the foundation exists. I'm going to make sure a 7-year-old gets her surgery within the next 2 weeks, Sloan said. The paperwork catches up later. Bet looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in the older woman's face. You sound like him, she said. Sloan did not have an answer to that. She felt the sentence land somewhere in her chest and stay there. Send me the file, she said. She called Garrett that evening. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the television in the background. A nature documentary, a narrator going serious about something. And then the sound dropped off as Garrett moved to another room. The foundation can't formally fund anyone for at least 6 weeks, she said. Legal timeline. But there's a case right now with a 6-week window. You're going to fund it yourself. Not a question, yes. But I need to walk through the family communication piece with you first. I know how to write a check. I don't know how to tell a parent their child's surgery is covered without making it feel like charity, like pity, like they owe something they can never repay. Silence on his end. She could hear him thinking, how did Warren approach it, he asked. He used Bet as an intermediary, kept himself completely anonymous, a padded envelope, a note card. That worked for him, but you're building something with a name and a structure. At some point, the families are going to know where it's coming from. You can't start with the anonymous model if the foundation is eventually going to have a face. So what would you do? He was quiet for a moment. I'd tell them the truth, he said. Not all of it, not the journals, not the personal history, just. There's a fund that exists to help families like yours. We've looked at your case. We want to help. There's nothing you need to do except let us, a beat. No mission statement language, no performance, just. You're not alone. Here's what that looks like practically. That's it, he paused. The hardest thing when you're in it is feeling like you're drowning, and everyone's handing you a form instead of a life jacket. If you skip the form and just throw the life jacket first, people can actually breathe again. Sloan wrote this down on the legal pad that had been living on her kitchen counter for 4 days. I'm not good at that, she said, the person part. Talking to someone in crisis, I know, he said. A beat, would you come with me, she asked. He didn't answer immediately. She heard him exhale slowly. When? This week if possible. Bet is going to arrange it through the hospital social worker. I'll need to sort out Owen's after-school coverage. I can arrange someone if that helps. It's fine. I'll figure it out. A pause. Sloan, yes, you're doing the right thing. You know that. She looked at the kitchen window. The city outside, dark and indifferent, doing its ordinary thing. I'm doing something, she said. Whether it's the right thing depends on how it lands. Yeah, he said. That's how most things work. She almost said something else. The moment passed. They said goodnight and she put the phone down and stood there in the kitchen for a minute. She picked up the legal pad, Next Chance Foundation. Written a week ago, beneath it tonight she wrote, Day 1, first case, 7-year-old girl, kidney surgery, Philadelphia. She looked at it, then went back to the desk. The social worker's name was June Whitfield. She'd been at Harwick General for 17 years. Which meant she'd sat across from approximately 17 years' worth of parents in impossible situations, and had developed the ability to read a room before she walked into it. She read this one in about 4 seconds. The Harker family was in the small consultation room on the 4th floor, round table, chairs that were slightly too soft. June used this room specifically for financial conversations because softer chairs made people feel less like they were in a hearing. Gwen Harker was 34, a dental hygienist with the look of someone who hadn't slept a full night in 3 weeks. Her husband Paul was 36, a high school history teacher with a quiet, deliberate way of speaking that said he chose his words carefully because he'd learned the wrong ones could cost something. Their daughter, Petra, was upstairs in the pediatric ward recovering from a diagnostic procedure. Neither parent had been more than 30 feet from the building in 4 days. June brought Garrett and Sloan in and introduced them without elaborate explanation. A representative from a private fund. Here to talk about options. She'd told the Harkers only that much in advance. Deliberately, because in her experience, the word foundation made people feel like charity cases before anyone had said a word, and June Whitfield was very particular about not doing that to people. Gwen looked at Sloan, then at Garrett. Trying to read which one was running this, what kind of fund, she asked. The kind that covers surgical costs for children in situations like yours, Sloan said. She'd rehearsed this with Garrett in the parking garage for 11 minutes before coming up. She was using his language. Not hers, no mission statement phrasing, no organizational terminology, just the sentence. Paul Harker's jaw tightened. We're not looking for charity, I know, Sloan said. I also know that the surgical center in Philadelphia requires full payment confirmed before scheduling, and that your current timeline has about 6 weeks in it, and that 6 weeks isn't enough time for a payment plan to get you there, said plainly. No cushioning, Garrett had told her. Don't soften the thing they already know. They know it. They've been living inside it. Softening it sounds like you think they can't handle what they're already handling. Paul looked at his wife. Gwen was looking at the table. What does it mean for Petra if this fund covers the surgery? She asked. She didn't look up when she said it. It means the Philadelphia Center gets confirmed funding this week, Sloan said. It means they can schedule. It means the 6-week window is no longer the thing you're working against. Gwen put both hands flat on the table. They were shaking slightly. There are no conditions, Paul asked, his teacher's voice. Measured, careful. No loan structure, no reporting requirements. Medical necessity letter from Petra's oncologist, which the hospital already has on file, Garrett said. Both Harkers looked at him. He hadn't spoken until this moment. Basic household financial statement. Insurance coverage summary. That's it, a beat. No home visits, no quarterly check-ins. No requirement to attend anything or speak with anyone you don't want to speak with. Paul looked at him steadily. How did you find out about this fund? Garrett paused for exactly 1 second. My son needed surgery 2.5 years ago, he said. Heart procedure. We were in a situation not entirely different from yours. Someone covered it anonymously. A pause. This fund is an extension of that. The room was quiet. Gwen looked up from the table for the first time. She looked at Garrett, then at Sloan, then back at Garrett, and her face carried the expression of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and is being asked to believe that it might be possible to put it down. Is Petra going to be okay? She asked. Not a question about medicine. She knew the medicine. She'd heard the odds from multiple oncologists. What she was asking had no statistical answer, and everyone in the room understood that. We can't promise that, Garrett said. But we can make sure the surgery isn't the part that stops her. Gwen Harker put her hands over her face. Her husband reached across and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and the two of them sat there in the way of people who have been strong in front of each other for so long that a small loosening of the tension becomes overwhelming. Sloan looked at her hands on the table. Garrett watched the couple and said nothing. There was nothing to say. This was not about the foundation or the legal structure or the carefully worded intake criteria. This was a room with two people who had been scared for 3 weeks. The fear was still there, but one piece of it had just been lifted. June Whitfield, standing near the door with the practiced stillness of someone who knew how to be present without intruding, caught Garrett's eye. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. The confirmation to the Philadelphia Center took 4 days to process. On the 5th day, Petra Harker's surgery was scheduled. Sloan didn't find out through Betty or June or anyone formal. She found out because Gwen Harker sent a text to the number Garrett had given her. 6:18 in the morning, she's scheduled. Thank you. Garrett forwarded it to Sloan. Sloan sat at her kitchen counter with her coffee and read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the counter for a moment. Then she picked it back up and sent Garrett a message. One down, he replied within a minute. The foundation is still 6 weeks from being real, 3 weeks now. I called the lawyer. A pause. Then of course you did. She almost smiled at the screen, almost. The social worker's name was June Whitfield. She'd been at Harwick General for 17 years, which meant she'd sat across from approximately 17 years' worth of parents in impossible situations and had developed the ability to read a room before she walked into it. She read this one in about 4 seconds. The Harker family was in the small consultation room on the 4th floor. Round table. Chairs that were slightly too soft. June used this room specifically for financial conversations because softer chairs made people feel less like they were in a hearing. Gwen Harker was 34, a dental hygienist, with the look of someone who hadn't slept a full night in 3 weeks. Her husband, Paul, was 36, a high school science teacher with a quiet, deliberate way of speaking that said he used his words carefully because he'd learned the wrong ones could cost something. Their daughter, Petra, was upstairs in the pediatric ward, recovering from a diagnostic procedure. Neither parent had been more than 30 feet from the building in 4 days. June brought Garrett and Sloan in and introduced them without elaborate explanation, a representative from a private fund. Here to talk about options. She'd told the Harkers only that much in advance, deliberately. Because in her experience the word foundation made people feel like charity cases before anyone had said a word, and June Whitfield was very particular about not doing that to people. Gwen looked at Sloan, then at Garrett, trying to read which one was running this. What kind of fund? She asked. The kind that covers surgical costs for children in situations like yours, Sloan said. She'd rehearsed this with Garrett in the parking garage for 11 minutes before coming up. She was using his language, not hers. No mission statement phrasing, no organizational terminology, just the sentence. Paul Harker's jaw tightened. We're not looking for charity, I know, Sloan said. I also know that the surgical center in Philadelphia requires full payment confirmed before scheduling, and that your current timeline has about 6 weeks in it. And that 6 weeks isn't enough time for a payment plan to get you there, said plainly. No cushioning, Garrett had told her. Don't soften the thing they already know. They know it. They've been living inside it. Softening it sounds like you think they can't handle what they're already handling. Paul looked at his wife. Gwen was looking at the table. What does it mean for Petra if this fund covers the surgery? She asked. She didn't look up when she said it. It means the Philadelphia Center gets confirmed funding this week, Sloan said. It means they can schedule. It means the 6-week window is no longer the thing you're working against. Gwen put both hands flat on the table. They were shaking slightly. There are no conditions, Paul asked, his teacher's voice measured, careful. No loan structure, no reporting requirements. Medical necessity letter from Petra's oncologist, which the hospital already has on file, Garrett said. Both Harkers looked at him. He hadn't spoken until this moment. Basic household financial statement. Insurance coverage summary. That's it, a beat. No home visits, no quarterly check-ins. No requirement to attend anything or speak with anyone you don't want to speak with. Paul looked at him steadily. How did you find out about this fund? Garrett paused for exactly 1 second. My son needed surgery 2.5 years ago, he said. Heart procedure. We were in a situation not entirely different from yours. Someone covered it anonymously. A pause. This fund is an extension of that. The room was quiet. Gwen looked up from the table for the first time. She looked at Garrett, then at Sloan, then back at Garrett. And her expression was the expression of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and is being asked to believe that it might be possible to put it down. Is Petra going to be okay? She asked. Not a question about medicine. She knew the medicine. She'd heard the odds from multiple oncologists. What she was asking had no statistical answer, and everyone in the room understood that. We can't promise that, Garrett said. But we can make sure the surgery isn't the part that stops her. Gwen Harker put her hands over her face. Her husband reached across and put his arm around her, and she leaned into him and the two of them sat there in the way of people who have been strong in front of each other for so long that a small loosening of the tension becomes overwhelming. Sloan looked at her hands on the table. Garrett watched the couple and said nothing. There was nothing to say. This was not about the foundation or the legal structure or the carefully worded intake criteria. This was a room with two people who had been scared for 3 weeks. The fear was still there, but one piece of it had just been lifted. June Whitfield, standing near the door with the particular stillness of someone who knew how to be present without intruding, caught Garrett's eye. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. The confirmation to the Philadelphia Center took 4 days to process. On the 5th day, Petra Harker's surgery was scheduled. Sloan didn't find out through Bet or June or anyone formal. She found out because Gwen Harker sent a text to the number Garrett had given her. 6:18 in the morning. She's scheduled. Thank you. Garrett forwarded it to Sloan. Sloan sat at her kitchen counter with her coffee and read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the counter for a moment. Then she picked it back up and sent Garrett a message. 1 down. He replied within a minute. The foundation is still 6 weeks from being real. 3 weeks now. I called the lawyer. A pause. Then, of course you did. She almost smiled at the screen. Almost. The Next Chance Foundation filed its non-profit paperwork 4 weeks later. In those 4 weeks, Sloan had assembled a 5-person board. Her estate lawyer, a pediatric oncologist from Harwick General referred by Bette Calloway, a child welfare advocate she'd met through a professional contact, and 2 people she had specifically interviewed for their knowledge of how charitable organizations failed. Because she was, as she told Garrett, far more interested in failure modes than success stories when it came to building something meant to last. She had also hired a part-time operations coordinator, a woman named Priscilla, who had previously managed intake for a legal aid nonprofit and understood the difference between a process that worked on paper and one that held up under pressure. Garrett reviewed the intake criteria document 3 times. He marked it up with notes from his spreadsheet, from his memory of what those applications had actually asked versus what had actually mattered. He flagged 4 places where the language was clean on paper but burdensome in practice. Sloan revised them. He flagged 2 more. She revised them again. On the 3rd pass, he handed the document back and said he didn't have anything else. She looked at the document, then at him. Are you sure? I'm sure. You've been thorough about telling me when something's wrong. I want to make sure you're not softening it because you think I've heard enough. I'm not softening anything. The document is good. He paused. The 2-week turnaround commitment is aggressive. Tight. It needs to be tight, I know. I'm noting it for when it gets hard. When is harder than if, she said. I know. He looked at the document one more time. The section on family communication still reads like it was written by someone who learned English from grant applications. She looked at the relevant section. Read it. What would you change? All of it. She slid the document across the desk without a word. He took it and rewrote 2 paragraphs in his own language. Plain, direct. The way he would have wanted someone to speak to him in a hospital waiting room. Not above him, not around him, to him. She read them, was quiet for a moment. This is better, she said. I know. She looked at him. I'm not sure whether you're easy to work with or difficult. I'm consistent, he said. Which is different from both. A sound came out of her. Not quite a sigh. Not quite a laugh. Somewhere between the two, and she went back to the document. There was an evening in the 5th week, not a scheduled meeting. Garrett had brought Owen along because Owen's friend had cancelled, and Sloan had said bring him without a second's pause. Owen went straight to the kitchen, introduced himself to Fran, asked whether there was any chance she'd reconsidered the red pepper flake situation since last time. Fran had in fact reconsidered. Upstairs, Garrett and Sloan worked through the family communication protocol, the language for first contact, the language for the funding confirmation call. This part, Garrett said, pointing to a line on the page. You can't say this over the phone. Why not? Because when someone calls to say the surgery is covered, the family isn't processing language. They're processing the fact that someone said yes. He looked at her. Keep it simple. Cover logistics first. Don't lead with gratitude or meaning or impact. Lead with, here's what happens next. Here's who to call at the surgical center. Here's the timeline. Then you can say the other things. Sloan was writing this down. And when they cry, she said, you let them. I don't. She stopped. I know, he said. You don't have to do anything. You just don't rush it, she nodded once. Made a note, from the kitchen below. The sound of Owen telling Fran that her pasta was significantly improved and that she should feel good about this development. Fran's laugh carried all the way up the stairs. Sloan looked toward the sound. Something crossed her face, quick, unguarded, gone before she fully registered it. He's a good kid, she said. He is, Garrett said. She looked back at the document, but she was smiling. Just slightly. The kind that didn't ask permission before it arrived. Garrett looked at the window. Outside, the last of the evening light was going amber over the driveway hedges, and he thought, not for the first time that week, not even the first time that day, that this thing they were building was real. That the room they were sitting in, the document between them, the woman across the desk who had read 8 years of her husband's journals alone at 2 a.m. and called an estate lawyer by Monday, all of it was real, and he thought about Owen saying, from the passenger seat 3 weeks ago, it would be a waste to find all that out and just be sad about it. 8 years old, already understanding the thing that took most people a lifetime. Grief was not a destination, it was a passage. What mattered was what you built on the other side. The foundation ran 14 cases in its first 3 months, 11 funded, 2 still inside the approval window. 1 declined because the diagnostic picture had changed significantly between application and review. The required procedure moving into a category Harwick General could handle within normal insurance parameters, which was the best possible reason to decline a case. The only kind Sloan had been willing to accept so far. Priscilla tracked everything in a shared spreadsheet she updated every Monday morning without being asked. Turnaround times, case status, documentation completion rates. She color-coded it in a way that made Garrett slightly uneasy when he looked at it, because the green cells outnumbered the yellow ones by a wide margin, and he kept waiting for that ratio to shift. It hadn't shifted yet, but it would, eventually. That was the nature of things built to last. They got tested before they got stable. The board met at the end of month 2 for its first formal operational review. Sloan presented the numbers with the crisp efficiency of someone who had been presenting to rooms full of skeptical people her entire professional life. She moved through the data without lingering. No flourishes, no performance, just figures and what they meant. Then she got to the turnaround metric, average time from intake to funding decision. 11 days, 2 board members exchanged a look. Sloan caught it. I'm not interested in celebrating that, she said. An 11-day average means some cases took longer. I want to know why. The board member who had run a child welfare advocacy organization for 15 years looked at Sloan over the conference table with an expression that said, this is either going to be a very effective organization or a very exhausting one to be part of. Probably both. She was not wrong. Garrett pushed back on a Tuesday in the 7th week. They were in the study, the de facto working space by now. The dead succulent on the window ledge had been replaced weeks ago by the one Owen had brought from the hardware store. Green and stubborn, doing exactly what Owen had promised it would do, not dying. Garrett had reviewed the first operational report. He set it on the desk between them. You're trying to do too many cases at once, he said. Sloan looked up from her laptop. We have the funding to support the current caseload. It's not about funding. It's about Priscilla. He kept his voice even. She's managing intake documentation, family communication, and hospital coordination simultaneously, at a quality level that won't hold if you add the 3 cases you're proposing to take on this month. I can absorb some of the coordination. You already work 16-hour days. I sleep fine. That's not the point. He sat down across from her. You're building something meant to outlast you. You've said that. But if you build it by running everyone at a pace that only works because they're personally committed to you and this mission, you're not building an institution. You're building something that collapses the moment anyone gets sick or burns out or has to leave. She looked at him steadily. That's direct. You told me to be direct. I know I did. She looked at the operational report. He could see her actually weighing it, running the numbers against the real capacity. Not for show, not to appear reasonable. Actually doing the math. What's your recommendation? Hire a second intake coordinator. Part-time to start. Someone Priscilla can train before you expand the caseload. He paused and closed the laptop at 9. She looked at him. That's not a professional recommendation. It's a practical one. He held her gaze. You're not useful to anyone if you break down. And you're running close to that edge right now. She was quiet. He watched her decide whether to deflect, to redirect the human observation into a process question. That was her move. He'd seen her use it a dozen times over the past weeks. Turn anything personal into something logistical. Safer, more manageable. She didn't use it this time. I'm aware, she said. If I stop moving, I start thinking. And the things I think about when I stop moving are not. A pause. Not productive, Warren, he said. Among other things, he didn't push further. He understood the shape of staying busy to stay ahead of grief. He'd spent the better part of Owen's first year after surgery doing exactly that. Extra shifts. Certification coursework at midnight. Every available minute filled with something purposeful. Because the alternative was sitting with how close it had come. How close he'd been to a completely different life. Post the position this week, he said. Second intake coordinator. Fine. She made a note, then looked up. I want to talk to you about something else. Okay. She closed the laptop, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. The board has started asking about a public launch, she said. A press event, announcing the foundation formally. Telling the story, she folded her hands on the desk. They want a human element, the story that explains why this exists. She looked at him directly. They want Owen's story. Garrett went very still. No, he said. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm telling you what they asked, and asking what you think. I think Owen is 8 years old and not a symbol. He's a kid. He didn't choose to be the reason this exists. He chose to have burritos instead of pizza and to tell you your house was too clean. He doesn't get to consent to being the face of something at 8 years old. I agree with you, Sloan said. He stopped completely, she said. I told the board the family story remains private. I'm not using Owen, I'm not using you, she paused. The story we tell publicly is Warren's, the broad strokes, not the journals, not anything private. A man who spent years quietly doing what this foundation now does formally. That's the narrative, she looked at him, but I wanted to tell you directly. Rather than have you find out another way. Garrett looked at her for a moment. Thank you, he said. You don't have to thank me for not doing something terrible. You'd be surprised how rare that is, she almost smiled. Not quite. A pause settled between them. Comfortable now in a way it hadn't been a month ago. The press event is in 3 weeks, she said. I'd like you to be there. Not as a speaker, just present. In case something goes sideways in a way I haven't anticipated. Sure, he said. I'll be there. Good. She reopened the laptop, then closed it again. Reached into the top drawer of the desk and placed a small envelope on the surface between them, his name on the front. Handwriting he didn't recognize. Not Warren's cramped script. Not Sloan's clean architectural print. Someone else entirely. This came in the mail yesterday, she said. Addressed to the foundation, care of this address. The only contact information we've made public so far. Inside the outer envelope. No return address. He picked it up and opened it. Inside, a note card. Handwritten. Short. I read about the Next Chance Foundation in the business column last week. I don't have much, but I'm sending what I can. My son had leukemia when he was 5. He's 18 now, starting college in the fall. Someone helped us when we had nothing left. I've been trying to figure out how to pay it forward for 13 years. I think this is how. A check was folded behind the note card. Garrett unfolded it. $940. Made out to the Next Chance Foundation in careful, slightly unsteady handwriting. The handwriting of someone older. Someone whose hands were no longer entirely steady but who had written this out deliberately, one number at a time. He looked at the check for a long moment. $940, he said. 13 years of someone waiting for the right place to put something down, Sloan said. He looked up at her. She was watching him. Her eyes were doing something she wasn't fully managing, trying to stay composed at the edges and not quite succeeding. I want to frame the note card, she said. Not publicly. Just in here. She looked around the study. If that seems... It doesn't seem anything, Garrett said. Frame it, she nodded. He set the check back on the desk carefully, like it was worth more than the number on it. Which, in some way that had nothing to do with accounting, it was. The press event was held at a downtown hotel conference room, medium-sized, nothing flashy. Sloan had been clear about that from the start. No gala, no dinner, no black tie. A conference table, some chairs, a brief statement, and a Q&A. The kind of event that said, this is a working organization, not a brand launch. Garrett stood at the back of the room with a cup of coffee and watched. Sloan was at the front. Steady in the way she was always steady in public. Not rigid, but grounded. She told the story the way they had agreed to tell it. Warren's years of private work, the gap in the system he had identified, the foundation as the formal extension of what he had been doing quietly for 8 years. She was clean and direct and unhurried, and she did not perform any of it. She didn't mention Owen. She didn't mention Garrett. She mentioned Betty Calloway by name, with Betty's permission, and Bet, sitting in the third row in a grey blazer, pressed her lips together in the way of someone trying not to cry in public and managing it by about 60%. A reporter from the local business section asked about funding sources. Sloan answered in 2 sentences. A reporter from the health desk asked about intake criteria. Sloan explained them clearly in under 90 seconds, which was impressive given the actual complexity involved. A third reporter, freelance, Garrett guessed, based on the notepad rather than a recorder, asked something different. "Why this?" she said. "You run a successful company. You have a full life. Plenty of people lose a spouse and find ways to honor their memory that don't involve building a non-profit from scratch. Why not just write a check to an existing organization?" The room went quiet. Sloan looked at the reporter for a moment. "Because the existing organizations weren't fast enough," she said, "and because my husband spent 8 years trying to compensate for that with his own money. One child at a time, without telling anyone, a beat, he had an idea for something better. He didn't get to build it." She paused, eyed. "I'm building it because he didn't get the chance to, and because the families who need help in 6 weeks can't wait for me to finish grieving first." The room held its quiet for another second. Then the moderator moved to the next question. Garrett looked at his coffee cup. There was a woman 2 rows ahead of him. Small. He didn't recognize her. She'd been sitting very still through the entire event. When Sloan said those last words, "The families who need it in 6 weeks can't wait for me to finish grieving first," the woman exhaled slowly. Looked at her lap, Garrett thought, she's here because she has a child. She heard about this somewhere and came to see if it was real. He looked at her for a moment, then walked forward and sat in the empty chair beside her. "Are you okay?" he said quietly. She looked at him. "Do you have a child who needs help?" She was quiet for a moment, then softly, "My daughter, cardiac condition. We're still in the diagnostic phase. The cardiologist said it could require a specialist and we don't. We're not." She stopped. After the event, Garrett said, "Come talk to me. Not to a form. To me. We'll figure out what the situation looks like and what we can do." She looked at him. The same look Gwen Harker had worn in that consultation room. The look of someone being asked to believe they can put something down. "Who are you?" she asked. Garrett thought about the truck, the cracked dashboard, carnations from a grocery store checkout lane, a cemetery on the east side with a black iron gate, a boy who talked to headstones like they were neighbors, "Someone who's been where you are," he said. He handed her one of the cards Priscilla had made. Plain white foundation name, a phone number, an email. She took it with both hands. Sloan found him after. The room mostly cleared. Chairs being stacked against the wall by 2 hotel staff working efficiently and indifferently. "You were talking to someone," she said. "Possible case," he said. "Still diagnostic. I told her to call Priscilla." Sloan looked at the door through which the woman had left, then at Garrett. "You walked up to a stranger in the middle of a press event," she said. He recognized the look she was giving him. The recalibrating look. The one she used when he'd done something she hadn't anticipated and was revising her model. "You'll recognize it eventually," he said. The look. "Someone who came to find out whether this is real or just a nice idea." Sloan was quiet for a moment. "Is it?" she said. "Real," he looked at her. "Petra Harker's surgery is in 4 days," he said. "The second case. The boy with the bone tumor. He's already started physical therapy. The man who sent $940 has a son starting college in the fall." He let that sit. "Yeah," he said. "It's real." She looked at the empty conference table. The ordinary aftermath of something that had started in a cemetery 2 months ago. 2 folding chairs left out. A water pitcher nobody had touched. "I keep thinking about the last journal entry," she said, "that he was going to come home the next day and talk to me. I know. I keep thinking about how different it would have been," she said. "If he'd made it home," Garrett looked at her. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe the thing that makes it real now is exactly that you had to find it yourself. That you went into that study and read all 8 years alone at 2 in the morning and decided it mattered." He paused. "That's not his foundation. It's yours. You built it from something he left behind. But you built it." She looked at him for a long moment. You're annoyingly good at saying the right thing, she said. I've been told I'm consistent, he said. She exhaled, the kind of exhale that releases something it's been holding for a while. Go home, she said. Owen's been with Fran for 5 hours. She's teaching him chess variations. He's fine. He beat her at the regular version twice. She's retaliating with the Sicilian defense. That tracks, Garrett said. They walked out of the empty conference room and into the hotel hallway. Neither of them said anything else, and the silence between them was the kind that no longer needed filling. Petra Harker came home on a Thursday. Gwen sent a photograph, not staged, not posed. Just a phone picture taken from the backseat of a car. Petra in hospital-issued socks and her own pajamas, small yellow suns on pale blue, leaning her head against the window with her eyes half open, the complete, boneless exhaustion of a child who has been through something large and is finally on the other side of it. Flat grey November light through the car window. Petra's hand loosely wrapped around her mother's. That was all. Garrett looked at the photograph for a long time, then he forwarded it to Sloan. She replied in 4 minutes, one word, good. He knew her well enough by now to understand that a 4-minute reply from Sloan Hargrove, who processed most things in under 90 seconds, meant she had sat with that photograph for 3.5 minutes before she typed anything. He put his phone in his pocket and went to pick up Owen from school. Winter came to Harwick the way it always did. Suddenly, one weekend, temperature dropping overnight and the trees going bare almost immediately, like they'd been waiting for an excuse. The city put on its grey face, the one it wore from November through March. People walked faster on the sidewalks. Coffee shops crowded in the afternoons. The freight company got busy with holiday shipping, and Garrett worked long days and sorted things out at the kitchen table after Owen went to bed. The Next Chance Foundation's caseload did not slow down for the weather. By the end of November, they had formally processed 14 cases, 11 funded. Priscilla had hired a second intake coordinator, a 26-year-old named Nolan, recently out of a social work graduate program, who had a talent for family communication that surprised even Priscilla. He wrote intake letters that were clear and human, and contained 0 words that would have looked at home in a grant application. Garrett read his first 3 letters and told Sloan quietly that they didn't need to worry about that piece anymore. She agreed. She also gave Nolan a raise after his 4th week, which was not standard probationary policy. Priscilla pointed this out. Sloan said probationary policy was designed to protect the organization from bad hires, and Nolan was clearly not a bad hire, so the policy did not apply. Priscilla wrote this down as a precedent for her own reference and said nothing further. The board met in December for the first formal quarterly review. The financial picture was stable. Sloan had seeded the foundation's operating fund substantially from her own accounts, and the press event had generated a steady wave of smaller donations that Priscilla tracked in a spreadsheet she updated every Monday. The $940 check had been followed by dozens more in similar ranges. Amounts that said, I don't have much, but I have this. There had also been 2 larger institutional donations. One from a regional hospital network that had read the business column piece and reached out. One from a small private foundation whose director had known Warren professionally. He'd called Sloan's office and said flatly that he should have known Warren was behind something like this. He wasn't behind it, Sloan had told him. He was beside it. I built it, the director had laughed. Written a check, joined the advisory council. Garrett was not at the quarterly board meeting. He was at Owen's school holiday concert. Owen had been practicing for 3 weeks with the dedicated focus he brought to things he was privately excited about, but publicly pretended to be indifferent to. He played the recorder. He was, by any objective measure, mediocre at the recorder. But he played with complete commitment. Garrett sat in the 3rd row of the school gymnasium and watched his son stand in the 2nd row of the assembled class and put the instrument to his lips with the expression of a person about to perform surgery. Eyebrows pulled together, eyes fixed forward, entirely serious. Something in Garrett's chest did the thing it did sometimes. Too large and too ordinary to have a proper name. Just the feeling of a life that had been very close to being different. He texted Sloan a photo of Owen mid-performance. She replied, he looks like he's defusing a bomb. Recorder concert. Same stakes, how is he so terrible but completely sincere about it? That's the important part. He put his phone away and watched the rest of the concert. January arrived. and with it the first anniversary of Sloan reading the journals. She didn't mark it as an occasion. She was not the type to mark things with ceremony. But she went into the study on a Sunday evening and sat at the desk and opened the final journal to the last entry and read it once more. I'm going to ask her tomorrow. Actually ask her. She closed it. She had been turning a question over for several weeks, examining it from different angles. The way you examine something you're not entirely sure whether to keep. It was the kind of question that could disrupt a working arrangement that was, by any practical measure, functioning well. The kind that could complicate things in ways that were hard to uncomplicate. She was aware of all of that. She was also not someone who had ever successfully talked herself out of asking a direct question by worrying about the disruption it might cause. She picked up her phone. "Are you free tomorrow evening?" Garrett replied after a few minutes. "Owen's at his friend Derek's for a sleepover, so yes, come for dinner. Not a work meeting. Just dinner," a longer pause this time. Then, "Okay." She put the phone down and looked at the framed note card on the study wall. The $940 donor's note, which Fran had helped her frame and hang 2 months ago. "I've been trying to figure out how to pay it forward for 13 years. I think this is how 13 years was a long time to carry something while waiting for the right place to put it down." She understood that feeling now in a way she hadn't before. Garrett brought wine. Because it seemed like the right thing to bring to a dinner explicitly designated as not a work meeting. And because Owen was not with him to have opinions about the selection. He stood at the front door and felt briefly, absurdly self-conscious in a way he hadn't felt since his mid-20s, which was information, which he chose not to examine too carefully right now. Fran let him in and then, with the tact of someone who had read the room with complete accuracy, said she was leaving for the evening. Dinner was in the oven. She'd set the table in the smaller dining room. The smaller dining room turned out to be a room off the kitchen that felt like it had been used. Marks on the table, a slight unevenness to one of the chairs, a smudge on the lower pane of the window that could only have come from Owen pressing his face against it at some point in the past several months. 2 place settings, no ceremony. Just plates and glasses and the bottle opener left out for the wine. Sloan came in from the kitchen, not a blazer, dark trousers, a simple grey top, and she looked without the frame of professional context around her, like a version of herself that had been there all along, but that Garrett was seeing without obstruction for the first time. "You look different without a legal pad," he said. "You look different without Owen," she said. "I feel different without Owen. Quieter, is that good or bad? Both." "Mostly good." He held up the wine. She took it from him, opened it with the efficiency of someone who approached most physical tasks as problems to be solved, poured 2 glasses, handed him one. They sat. She had made pasta. Not Fran's pasta, something simpler. The result of someone who cooked infrequently and had chosen a recipe with the fewest possible places to go wrong. It was slightly overcooked. She knew it. He could tell by the way she assessed it when she served it. A brief, honest look, then the decision not to comment. He didn't comment either. He ate it. "Warren would have had opinions about this pasta," she said. "Was he a good cook?" "No, but he had opinions anyway. He would have told me the timing was off and offered to fix it next time." A pause. And then the next time he would have used 4 times as many ingredients and left the kitchen looking like a disaster area. She looked at her plate, and it would have been better than this. "This is fine," Garrett said. "You're being polite, I'm being honest. I've had worse pasta. I once made Owen pasta so overcooked he asked if it was soup." She looked at him. "What did you do?" Added a spoon. "Called it soup. Did he eat it?" 2 bowls. "Told me it was the best soup I'd ever made." Which was technically true, she laughed, small and real. The kind that seemed to catch her slightly off guard when it arrived. A door opening in a room she kept mostly closed. They ate for a few minutes without talking. The silence comfortable in the way that silence between 2 people who have worked through hard things together can be comfortable. No need to fill it, no discomfort in letting it sit. Then Sloan set her fork down. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay, and I want you to answer honestly. Not the way you think I want to be answered. I always answer honestly. You answer practically. It's not always the same." She looked at him directly. "Over the past several months, working on this together, has any part of it felt like something more than a professional arrangement to you?" The question sat between them. Clear, unambiguous, no softening around it, no plausible deniability. Just the question placed on the table the way she placed everything, directly, without flinching. Garrett looked at his wineglass. Then at her. Yes, he said. She nodded once. The way she nodded when she received information she'd suspected but needed confirmed. For me also, she said. How long? A while. She picked up her fork, then put it down again. The night I called you about the Harker family, she said, when you told me to go home and close the laptop at 9. I realized I'd been looking forward to those calls in a way that had nothing to do with the foundation. He was quiet for a moment. Sloan, he said. I know the complications, she said. I'm not naive about them. You're a single father and Owen comes first, as he should. I've been widowed for less than 2 years and that carries its own weight. We work together on something that matters to both of us, and disrupting that is a real risk. She said all of this evenly, the way she mapped failure modes before building anything. I'm aware of all of it, she said. So am I, he said, and he looked at her, the woman who had confronted a stranger at a grave and demanded answers, who had gone home and read 8 years of her husband's private journals until 4 in the morning and called an estate lawyer by Monday, who had stood at a press event and said the families who need it in 6 weeks can't wait for me to finish grieving first, in the way of someone who will not cry in public, which meant tilting her chin up 1 degree and saying the true thing instead of the safe one. I think, he said, that the fact that you laid all of that out like a risk assessment is either the most romantic or the least romantic thing I've ever heard, and I genuinely can't decide which. She stared at him, then she laughed, fully, real and unguarded. The kind she'd been holding back, and it changed the room. That's fair, she said. I'm serious about the assessment being right, he said. All of those complications are real. I know they are. She looked at him steadily. Owen will have opinions. Of course he will. He has opinions about red pepper flakes. He'll ask 100 questions. I'll answer them. I'm not afraid of your son, she said. He's the most straightforward person in this entire situation. Garrett thought about Owen sitting on the armrest of her chair at their first visit, announcing preemptively that he was not going to fall. Owen presenting the replacement succulent with complete gravity. Owen saying from the passenger seat heading home, she's lonely, people who have a lot going on in their life don't have houses that clean. Yeah, Garrett said. He is, so. She looked at him. I'm not suggesting we make any dramatic declaration. I'm suggesting we stop pretending the thing I just said isn't true, and we see what that looks like. That, he said, I can do. She picked up her fork again. He picked up his wine. The slightly overcooked pasta sat between them on a table with a smudged window and imperfect chairs. Neither of them said anything else about it for a while, and the silence was the most comfortable it had ever been. January arrived, and with it the first anniversary of Sloan reading the journals. She didn't mark it as an occasion. She was not the type to mark things with ceremony. But she went into the study on a Sunday evening and sat at the desk and opened the final journal to the last entry and read it once more. I'm going to ask her tomorrow. Actually ask her. She closed it. She had been turning a question over for several weeks, examining it from different angles. The way you examine something you're not entirely sure whether to keep. It was the kind of question that could disrupt a working arrangement that was, by any practical measure, functioning well. The kind that could complicate things in ways that were hard to uncomplicate. She was aware of all of that. She was also not someone who had ever successfully talked herself out of asking a direct question by worrying about the disruption it might cause. She picked up her phone. Are you free tomorrow evening? Garrett replied after a few minutes. Owen's at his friend Derek's for a sleepover, so yes. Come for dinner, not a work meeting. Just dinner, a longer pause this time. Then, okay. She put the phone down and looked at the framed note card on the study wall. The $940 donor's note, which Fran had helped her frame and hang 2 months ago. I've been trying to figure out how to pay it forward for 13 years. I think this is how 13 years was a long time to carry something while waiting for the right place to put it down. She understood that feeling now in a way she hadn't before. Garrett brought wine, because it seemed like the right thing to bring to a dinner explicitly designated as not a work meeting, and because Owen was not with him to have opinions about the selection. He stood at the front door and felt briefly, absurdly self-conscious in a way he hadn't felt since his mid-20s, which was information, which he chose not to examine too carefully right now. Fran let him in and then, with the tact of someone who had read the room with complete accuracy, said she was leaving for the evening. Dinner was in the oven. She'd set the table in the smaller dining room. The smaller dining room turned out to be a room off the kitchen that felt like it had been used. Marks on the table, a slight unevenness to one of the chairs, a smudge on the lower pane of the window that could only have come from Owen pressing his face against it at some point in the past several months. 2 place settings. No ceremony, just plates and glasses and the bottle opener left out for the wine. Sloan came in from the kitchen, not a blazer, dark trousers, a simple grey top, and she looked without the frame of professional context around her, like a version of herself that had been there all along but that Garrett was seeing without obstruction for the first time. "You look different without a legal pad," he said. "You look different without Owen," she said. "I feel different without Owen." Quetta. "Is that good or bad?" "Both." "Mostly good." He held up the wine. She took it from him, opened it with the efficiency of someone who approached most physical tasks as problems to be solved, poured 2 glasses, handed him one. They sat. She had made pasta. Not Fran's pasta, something simpler. The result of someone who cooked infrequently and had chosen a recipe with the fewest possible places to go wrong. It was slightly overcooked, she knew it. He could tell by the way she assessed it when she served it. A brief, honest look. Then the decision not to comment. He didn't comment either. He ate it. Warren would have had opinions about this pasta, she said. Was he a good cook? No. But he had opinions anyway. He would have told me the timing was off and offered to fix it next time. A pause. And then the next time he would have used 4 times as many ingredients and left the kitchen looking like a disaster area. She looked at her plate, and it would have been better than this. "This is fine," Garrett said. "You're being polite. I'm being honest. I've had worse pasta. I once made Owen pasta so overcooked he asked if it was soup." She looked at him. "What did you do?" Added a spoon. "Called it soup." "Did he eat it?" 2 bowls. Told me it was the best soup I'd ever made." Which was technically true, she laughed, small and real. The kind that seemed to catch her slightly off guard when it arrived. Like a door opening in a room she kept mostly closed. They ate for a few minutes without talking. The silence comfortable in the way that silence between 2 people who have worked through hard things together can be comfortable. No need to fill it, no discomfort in letting it sit. Then Sloan set her fork down. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay, and I want you to answer honestly. Not the way you think I want to be answered. I always answer honestly. You answer practically. It's not always the same thing." She looked at him directly. "Over the past several months, working on this together, has any part of it felt like something more than a professional arrangement to you?" The question sat between them. Clear, unambiguous. No softening around it, no plausible deniability. Just the question placed on the table the way she placed everything, directly. Without flinching, Garrett looked at his wine glass. Then at her. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. The way she nodded when she received information she'd suspected but needed confirmed. "For me also," she said. "How long?" "A while." She picked up her fork, then put it down again. "The night I called you about the Harker family," she said, "when you told me to go home and close the laptop at 9. I realized I'd been looking forward to those calls in a way that had nothing to do with the foundation." He was quiet for a moment. "Sloan," he said. "I know the complications," she said. "I'm not naive about them. You're a single father and Owen comes first, as he should. I've been widowed for less than 2 years and that carries its own weight. We work together on something that matters to both of us, and disrupting that is a real risk." She said all of this evenly, the way she mapped failure modes before building anything. "I'm aware of all of it," she said. "So am I," he said, and he looked at her, the woman who had confronted a stranger at a grave and demanded answers, who had gone home and read 8 years of her husband's private journals until 4 in the morning and called an estate lawyer by Monday, who had stood at a press event and said the families who need it in 6 weeks can't wait for me to finish grieving first, in the particular way of someone who will not cry in public, which meant tilting her chin up 1 degree and saying the true thing instead of the safe one. "I think," he said, "that the fact that you laid all of that out like a risk assessment is either the most romantic or the least romantic thing I've ever heard, and I genuinely can't decide which." She stared at him, then she laughed, fully, real and unguarded, the kind she'd been holding back, and it changed the room. "That's fair," she said. "I'm serious about the assessment being right," he said. All of those complications are real, I know they are. She looked at him steadily. Owen will have opinions. Of course he will. He has opinions about red pepper flakes. He'll ask 100 questions. I'll answer them. I'm not afraid of your son, she said. He's the most straightforward person in this entire situation. Garrett thought about Owen sitting on the armrest of her chair at their first visit, announcing preemptively that he was not going to fall. Owen presenting the replacement succulent with complete gravity. Owen saying, from the passenger seat heading home, she's lonely. People who have a lot going on in their life don't have houses that clean. Yeah, Garrett said. He is, so she looked at him. I'm not suggesting we make any dramatic declaration. I'm suggesting we stop pretending the thing I just said isn't true. And we see what that looks like. That, he said, I can do. She picked up her fork again. He picked up his wine. The slightly overcooked pasta sat between them on a table with a smudged window and imperfect chairs. Neither of them said anything else about it for a while, and the silence was the most comfortable it had ever been. Spring arrived in Harwick the way it always did. One warm week, then a cold snap, then warmth again, the trees making a cautious second attempt at green. The cemetery on the corner of Prater Avenue and 6th Street got its annual cleanup from the city crew, who actually showed up this year. The black iron gate got a coat of fresh paint. It looked, for a few weeks at least, like something that had been tended to. On the first Sunday of April, Garrett pulled the truck into its usual spot on the street outside. Owen was unbuckling before the engine was off, but this time when he climbed out, there was a third door opening. Sloan stepped out of the passenger side. She was carrying flowers, not carnations. Owen had told her about the carnations at the kitchen table the night before. The checkout lane, the grocery store, whatever was left in the bucket because that was what they could afford, and Garrett had long since stopped being embarrassed about it. Owen had listened and then studied her for a moment and said she could pick something different if she wanted. The man in the grave wouldn't mind, which was both very Owen and probably true. She had chosen white tulips, a small bunch, still in the florist's paper she hadn't removed because it hadn't occurred to her to. And she was still learning the ways that grief could surface in small practical decisions. Owen had accepted this choice without comment, which, for Owen, was high praise. They walked through the gate together, all three of them. Owen ran slightly ahead because he always ran slightly ahead on this path. Garrett walked in the middle, Sloan walked beside him, close but not touching, because they were both still learning the choreography of this and had agreed without saying it explicitly to let Owen set the pace. The northeast corner, the ornamental hedge, the dark grey granite Sloan Hargrove, 1978 to 2022, husband, builder, dreamer, crouched down and placed his carnations against the base of the stone, stem by stem, the way he always did, then the small, serious pause he always observed. Hi, he said. It's us again, except there's 3 of us now. Said the same way he said everything else at this grave. Easy, no performance. Just information delivered plainly to someone he'd been talking to for 2 years. He looked up at Sloan, who was standing a step back, still holding the tulips. You can put them down, he said. There's room. She stepped forward, crouched beside him, placed the white tulips next to the carnations. She stayed crouched for a moment. Longer than she usually allowed herself to stay close to anything that made her feel uncertain. She looked at the headstone. She had seen it in photographs before. The cemetery's public records visible online, and she had looked at it once in person, 2 months after Warren died alone in the cold of January, and had lasted approximately 4 minutes before getting back in her car and driving away. She had not come back after that. She was here now. I read everything, she said quietly. Not performing it, not for Garrett or Owen, just saying it, all 8 years. I know what you were doing, she paused. I know what you were going to ask me. She stopped. I would have said yes. I want you to know that. She stood back up. Owen was looking at her, not in his probing, problem-solving way. The softer way he looked at things he had already decided he understood. Did you know him? He asked. Yes, she said. Not as well as I thought. Better than I knew when he was alive. Owen considered this. That's kind of backwards, she said. It is, he nodded. Filed it somewhere internal, then turned back to the headstone and resumed his usual proceedings. So, he said to Warren, the foundation is doing well. I know because I hear about it a lot. A pause. A lot. Dad talks about it at dinner, which used to be when I could talk about whatever I wanted. Now I have to wait for a gap. He glanced back at Garrett. I'm not complaining. It's a good thing to talk about. Garrett looked briefly at the sky. We helped 31 kids, Owen continued. I know because Sloan showed me the number on the spreadsheet. She has a lot of spreadsheets, he considered this. Also, she's pretty good at chess, which I did not expect. I've beaten her 7 times, but she's beaten me 12, so I'm still working on it. Sloan folded her hands, said nothing, but something was happening in her face that she wasn't entirely managing. And Dad is doing okay, Owen said. He's better than he was. He used to have this look sometimes, like he was carrying something really heavy and didn't want anyone to notice. He stood up, brushed gravel from the knee of his jeans. He doesn't have that look as much anymore. Said with the finality of someone delivering a closing statement to people he trusted to act on it. Then he stepped back and stood between his father and Sloan. The 3 of them stood there in the April light, in the northeast corner of a cemetery that was not a beautiful cemetery, in front of a headstone for a man who had spent 8 years deciding quietly, methodically, without an audience, that other people's children deserved a chance. Garrett looked at Sloan. She was looking at the headstone, and her face was not the steady professional composure she wore when she needed to hold something at arm's length. It was the face of someone who had set something down, not put it away, not stopped caring, just stopped holding it up by sheer force of will, as if it might disappear if she let it rest. There was grief in it still, and there was something else. Something that had not been there when she confronted a stranger at this grave 14 months ago. Something that looked imperfectly and incompletely like the first stage of peace. She felt him looking. Turned. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. Owen looked up at both of them. Then he looked back at the headstone. Then he crouched down one more time and straightened the carnations slightly, one stem that had listed to the left, and stood back up. Okay, he said, with the tone of someone who had completed what he came to do. Can we get ice cream after? Garrett looked at Sloan. Sloan looked at Owen. Yes, she said. We can get ice cream after. Owen started back up the gravel path without waiting, because he always walked back faster than he walked in. His sneakers crunched with each step. He didn't look back this time. Garrett and Sloan followed at the pace of people who were not in a hurry. The iron gate stood open at the end of the path, its fresh black paint catching the April light. Beyond it, the street was doing what streets always did, indifferent to the weight of what had shifted on the other side of that gate, just carrying on, a car moving past, a dog pulling at a leash on the sidewalk, the ordinary world spinning on its ordinary axis. Garrett thought about Warren Hargrove writing at 11:47 on the last night of his life. I'm going to ask her tomorrow. A sentence pointed forward. Not back. Not at what had been built or left unfinished or lost, but at what might still be possible. One day away. One conversation away. He had not gotten that conversation. But somewhere in the 8 years of journals, in the quiet acts logged and then kept secret, in the watch sent anonymously to a stranger's apartment, Warren Hargrove had left something behind that was still moving forward. Through Betty Calloway, who had flagged cases for 6 years and grieved quietly when the calls stopped coming. Through Garrett, who had carried gratitude to a grave every month because he didn't know where else to put it. Through Owen, who had talked to a headstone like a neighbor and said things that took most adults decades to understand. Through Sloan, who had read 8 years of her husband's private journals alone in the dark and called a lawyer by Monday morning. Through the 31 children who were somewhere this April Sunday doing what children do, arguing and laughing and complaining about too much homework and not enough dessert. Because someone had decided quietly, without asking for anything back, that they deserved to keep doing those things. The thing about kindness done in the dark without an audience was that it didn't end when the person ended. It moved forward through the people it had touched. Into the children they raised, into the organizations they built, into the strangers they sat beside and asked, "Are you okay? Do you have a child who needs help? Come talk to me," not to a form. To me it moved forward the way water moves through stone. Not fast, not announced, not dramatic. Just steady, just patient, just constant enough to outlast the hardness of the world. Warren Hargrove had understood that. He just hadn't known that other people would be the ones to carry it. Garrett caught up to Owen at the gate. Owen had stopped there, one hand on the freshly painted iron, waiting with the slightly impatient energy of a child who had been patient long enough. "Chocolate or vanilla?" Owen said. I haven't decided, Garrett said. You always get chocolate. I like to keep my options open. You always say that, and you always get chocolate. Sloan came through the gate behind them. Owen looked at her. What do you get? He said. She considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Depends on the place, she said. If they have salted caramel, that. If not, vanilla. Owen looked at her with new respect. That's a good answer, he said. Dad just gets chocolate and acts like it's a decision. I heard that, Garrett said. I know, Owen said. He started down the sidewalk. Sloan fell into sap step beside Garrett. The street was warm with early spring light, the kind that made everything look slightly more optimistic than it had any business looking. 3 people walking away from a cemetery toward ice cream on a Sunday afternoon. Ordinary, unremarkable, exactly the kind of afternoon that 3 years ago Garrett had been terrified his son would never see. He looked at Owen, 8 years old, healthy, full of opinions about chocolate ice cream and chess openings and the right amount of red pepper flakes in a pasta sauce, and felt the thing he'd been feeling for 2.5 years. The thing too large to name properly. The gratitude that didn't fit inside a normal-sized moment. He had been carrying it to a grave every month, leaving it in carnations and quiet sentences, and it turned out the right place to put it had been here all along. Not at a headstone, not in a padded envelope sent anonymously, not in a ledger of good deeds kept in a dark green journal, here in motion. In the ongoing imperfect daily act of choosing to move forward, Garrett Merritt walked down the sidewalk in the April light, his son 3 steps ahead, Sloan Hargrove beside him, and understood, with the full weight of everything that had led him to this moment, that gratitude this size was not a feeling you held, it was a thing you did, every day, for as long as you were able. That was all, that was enough.